Good morning everyone. Today we are going to start the revision, that is life process, topic respiration. So respiration is the process of exchange of gases, that is between the lung and the oxygen and the blood. So respiration is taking place in two steps. The first process of respiration is called as breathing. Breathing means the exchange of gases. It is a physical exchange. That means there is no chemical changes. Here the exchange is taking place between the lung and the blood. The air from the atmosphere enters into the lung through the respiratory tract, and there the exchange will take place between the lung and the blood. And here no chemical changes occurs, hence it is called as physical. Purely the exchange, that is from the lung, the oxygen rich air, oxygen will enters into the blood, and in return from the blood the carbon dioxide will go to the lung. So there it is only the exchange, and in this process there are two steps. The first process is called as inhalation. The second process is called as exhalation. So what do you mean by inhalation? Inhalation means it is the process of taking in the oxygen rich air into the lungs, and within the lungs the exchange will take place between the alveolus and the blood, and as a result from the blood the carbon dioxide will be delivered into the alveolus, and from there the carbon dioxide rich air will pass through the respiratory tract and gives out through the nostrils. That process is called as exhalation. So inhalation and exhalation together we will call it as breathing. The second step of this respiration we will call it as internal respiration or cellular respiration. Why it is called as cellular respiration? Means it is a chemical process. Chemical process means the breaking of glucose within the cell in the presence of oxygen, and as a result the carbon dioxide, water and energy will be produced. So here it is taking place within the cell, and there is a chemical change occurs. That means in the presence of oxygen, glucose is broken down into carbon dioxide and water. So the chemical change occurs, hence that process is called as chemical process. And finally the energy will be released. So for the energy only we are the requirement of the energy for performing various metabolic activities, respiration is essential. Then when we move on to the breakdown of glucose by various pathways, that is this flow chart in the figure, there is a flow chart. That flow chart is very important. So in all the cells, cellular respiration takes place within the cell, and in all the cells in the cytoplasm the first step is called as glycolysis. The word meaning is glyco means glucose, lysis means breaking. So in all the cells, irrespective of whether they are unicellular or multicellular, in all the cells the first step, that is glucose, will be converted into pyruvate. Glucose is a 6-carbon compound and pyruvate is a 3-carbon compound. So in the presence of in the cytoplasm it is broken down. In that process the essentiality of oxygen is not required. So it is anaerobic respiration, anaerobic process. Oxygen is not essential to convert glucose into a 3-carbon, that is pyruvate. But this pyruvate will undergo 3 different pathways in different organisms. That is, if it is a yeast cell which is a unicellular, which require only less amount of energy, and it can live in anaerobic conditions. That means in the absence of oxygen. So in the absence of oxygen within the yeast cell, the pyruvate which is formed will be converted into ethanol, carbon dioxide and less amount of energy. So ethanol is a 2-carbon compound, and from pyruvate is a 3-carbon. So 2-carbon compound ethanol will form. The remaining carbon will be taken for utilizing the carbon dioxide formation plus energy. So this process is also called as anaerobic respiration, because in the absence of oxygen the glucose is completely broken down into ethanol, then carbon dioxide and energy, and this process is called as alcohol fermentation. Okay, alcohol fermentation, and mainly this process only we are commercially utilizing in the industries, that is baking industry, beverage industry and all. In baking industry, when we add yeast into the dough, that is in the cereals and all the flour, and there it will, in the presence of sugar, it will undergo the metabolic process, and as a result, that means anaerobic respiration, there the sugar will be converted. Sugar means glucose will be converted into ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy, and this carbon dioxide will be trapped within the dough. When we are steaming it, the carbon dioxide will be eliminated out. That makes the bread or bun or idli or dosha, whatever it is, that will be fluffy in nature. So mainly baking industry, we are using lactic alcohol fermentation. The same procedure only we are using in beverages also for making wine, whiskey, brandy, etc. There we are using the yeast. We will add yeast to the fruit juices, and there the fermentation will take place, and the ultimate result will be ethanol, ethyl alcohol, which is used, which is the main ingredient in the beverages. Okay, then the second cause of breakdown is, second method of breaking down of pyruvate in the deficiency of oxygen. So when a person is performing strenuous exercise, muscular exercise, the deficiency of oxygen will take place because fast muscular contraction is required. In such case, the normal amount of oxygen within the cell will not be sufficient to meet the energy requirement. So that time the muscle cells will undergo anaerobic respiration in the absence of or in the deficiency of oxygen, and as a result the lactic acid will be produced. So this lactic acid and a little bit of energy, that energy will be utilized for meeting the extra energy requirement for the at the time of strenuous exercise. But gradually more and more lactic acid will be accumulated in the muscle, that will lead to muscle cramps. So that is why after the strenuous exercise, without proper practice, if you are performing, then it will lead to muscle fatigue or muscle pain, etc. And within 2 or 3 days, if you are gradually it will disappear. That means the lactic acid gradually it will be dissolved off and the pain will be relieved. But immediately after the exercise, sometimes we may feel the muscular pain or muscle cramps, we can say. The third type is called as aerobic respiration, that is in the presence of oxygen. Each and every cell, normal cells, the aerobic respiration takes place. That is, if enough amount of oxygen is present, means the pyruvate will be completely converted into carbon dioxide, water and energy. Here the energy produced will be approximately 36 ATP molecules or 38 ATP molecules will be produced, and it is taking place within the cell organelle that is called as mitochondria. So mitochondria take initiative for the production of more amount of energy, hence the mitochondria is also called as powerhouse of the cell. So the aerobic respiration is taking place in mitochondria. Deficiency of oxygen means that is taking place in muscle, lactic acid formation, muscle cramps it can result in, and yeast means the deficient or absence of oxygen. There the alcoholic fermentation takes place. As a result, ethanol also can be formed. So this flow chart will explain the different pattern of breakdown of glucose in different situations. Okay, now we will move on to the next step, that is the respiration. The difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. 2 mark questions and all they will ask. So aerobic respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen or deficiency of oxygen. And here second point, aerobic respiration occurs in mitochondria, whereas anaerobic respiration takes place in the cytoplasm. That means cytoplasm of the yeast cells, we can say, or cytoplasm of the muscle cells. Then the third point is end products of aerobic respiration is carbon dioxide, water and energy. Energy second point, fourth point I have written. So carbon dioxide, water and more amount of energy, that is within bracket if you want you can write 36 or 38 molecules of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency of the cell. Whereas in anaerobic respiration the end products can be, if it is yeast means it can be ethyl alcohol, or if it is muscle means it can be lactic acid. Depending upon the situation, the anaerobic respiration, the products also will vary. And here the energy produced will be compared to the aerobic, it will be very less, that is 2 molecules of energy only it can produce in the anaerobic respiration. But since yeast is unicellular, very simple organization, that is enough for the yeast to continue their metabolic activities. Now we will move on to how the respiration, or is there any respiration that takes place in plants? Yes, of course, respiration, even though they perform photosynthesis. For the photosynthesis, it is taking place only in the daytime. So the plants will utilize oxygen and utilize carbon dioxide, and they will convert into glucose in the presence of oxygen, in the presence of carbon dioxide, and release oxygen as a waste product. That is taking place in the presence of light. Okay, so that is why it is called as photosynthesis. But simultaneously in the daytime as well as in the nighttime there won't be any photosynthesis, only respiration only will take place, because in order to carry out all the metabolic activities in the plant cells, they require oxygen. So daytime they are eliminating oxygen as photosynthetic waste. That oxygen the plants will utilize for respiring. But in the night time, there is no photosynthesis, so the carbon dioxide, oxygen will be taken from the atmosphere. So day and night, the plants are respiring and they are utilizing oxygen, and they gives out carbon dioxide. But in the daytime, simultaneously, the photosynthesis also taking place, so it will be balanced in such a way. Both the requirement of oxygen will be utilized for respiration, and the carbon dioxide will be released out. The same carbon dioxide the plants will be utilized for the photosynthesis. Whereas in night means the plants will respire and they will give out carbon dioxide, they will utilize oxygen. So that is why it is commonly we say during daytime sleeping under a tree will make you fresh, whereas if you are sleeping under the tree during the night time, that will gives you more tiredness. It is because that daytime if you are sleeping means the plants will release more amount of oxygen than carbon dioxide, so that oxygen will enrich the presence amount of oxygen in the near vicinity under the tree. Whereas if you are sleeping under the tree during night means plants also will release carbon dioxide, we also will release carbon dioxide, so the surroundings, the amount of carbon dioxide will be more, so that will make you more sick or more tired. So it is better to avoid sleeping under a tree during night time because of this process. So then how the plants are respiring? So mainly the plants, they do not have almost all the surface of the plants are exposed to the atmosphere. So everywhere, that is in the leaves means there are minute pores, that is called as stomata. So through the stomata, the minute openings, the oxygen rich air will enter, and as a result of respiration carbon dioxide will be released, that will go out through the stomata itself. Whereas in stem means there are small openings, again it is there, that is called as lenticels. So through the lenticels the respiratory exchange takes place even in the stem also. So this is the brief idea about how the plants are respiring. So both in day as well as in the night the plants will be respiring. Then the next process is what is the difference between how the animals will respire in different habitat conditions. So here the animals, there are terrestrial animals as well as aquatic animals also. So terrestrial animals, the atmospheric air is the source of respiratory gases. So atmospheric air contain more amount of oxygen, so directly they can take it. So for enhancing that exchange process, there are different types of respiratory organs. So human beings, birds and higher organism, mainly the main respiratory organ is a pair of lungs. So lungs will help in respiratory exchange. In insects means, in insects that is fly, cockroach, etc. it is trachea, will say, on the sides of the body there are minute openings which leads into tubular structures. So direct diffusion of oxygen through this tracheal tube, the tube, then it exchange directly, it can be taking place. So here the source of oxygen is atmosphere in the terrestrial oxygen, and the exchange of gas, the second point, that is taking place by diffusion, where there is more to less, the movement of the air takes place. Then the main organ should contain certain requirements. That is, if it is lungs, means it should have extensive surface area. So lung itself is made up of minute many balloon-like structures, that is called as alveolus, which is lined by very thin membrane, and it is surrounded by many blood capillaries and blood vessels. So highly vascular, so rich supply of blood will be there, and the lung itself is surrounded, the alveolus itself is surrounded by very thin membrane, and it is moist in covering is there. So all these enhance the maximum respiratory exchange. Whereas in aquatic animals, the fishes, the tadpole of amphibia and all, there the respiratory organ is gills. Gills also satisfy the same conditions, that is extensive surface area. There is small hair-like structures only, so extensive surface area, very thin membrane, and that is red in color, that means it is highly vascular. So all these characteristics makes the gills also an suitable respiratory organ when the animal organ for aquatic animals. So here instead of the source of respiratory gas is mainly the oxygen, which is dissolved in water. But when we compare the amount of oxygen with the terrestrial atmospheric air, the more amount of oxygen is present in atmosphere than the water. Water compared to that one, less amount of oxygen only dissolved in water. So in order to compensate that one, how the aquatic animals are adapted means they will increase the rate of breathing. Okay, so the breathing rate will be more compared to terrestrial animals, because the oxygen, amount of oxygen dissolved in water is less compared to the amount of water that is present in air. So the gills respiration takes place, and more breathing rate will be can be observed in aquatic animals. Example, frog, tadpole of frog, as well as the fishes, the gills are acting as the main respiratory organ. Now we will move on to more detailed study of human respiratory system. So human respiratory system, and we are saying it consists of main organ, that is a pair of lungs, and it is pyramidal in shape, and it is very well protected by a double membrane lining, that is called as pleura. Outer pleura and inner pleura, which occupies a space, pleural space. It is filled with a fluid, pleural fluid we can say, which will act as a shock absorber. So it will protect, and apart from that, it also again externally it is protected. It is occupied within the chest cavity, and it is protected very well by rib cage. Sidewise the ribs, and in the front there is a chest bone, we can call it as sternum, and at the back the vertebra. So the whole thing together act as a box, and it is called as rib cage. So rib cage also will protect the lungs from mechanical injury. Then how the air is entering, so that is called as respiratory tract. So at the tip of the nose there are two minute openings. That opening is called as nostrils. It will lead into a cavity. That cavity is called as which one? That cavity is called as the cavity, nasal cavity. It is lined by minute hairs. That hairs will help in filtering the air. So it will filter the dust or any powdery particles are there in the lung, means to a certain extent it will filter the air. And it is also lined by mucous membrane, that is small slimy coating will be there. So if any air contain any other bacteria or any other germs and all, means it will contain lysozyme, the bacterial antibacterial agent. So it will kill or destroy or inactivate the germs that is present in the air. So air filtering also will take place. At the same time, it also can inactivate the germs which are entering into, and since the lining is completely lined with highly blood vessels also passing through that, small blood capillaries are passing through that. So slightly the air, when it is entering the blood, from the blood the heat energy will be released. So the warming, that is slightly the air will be warmed, and then it will be passed on. So filtering also will take place. Then antibacterial activity also will be there with the help of lysozyme. Then slightly the air will be heated, and then the bacteria and all means they will be inactivated. So in that way the pure air will be allowed to enter into the next chamber, the respiratory tract. So nostril, nasal cavity, then a common chamber only, that where the buccal cavity also will open, that chamber is called as pharynx. It is a common space only. The pharynx, from the pharynx the air will leads into the next region, that is called as larynx. Larynx is also called as sound box, because across the larynx there are two sets of vocal cords are ligaments are lying like this way. So when the air is passing through, the ligaments will flutter. Fluttering movements of the ligaments when the air is passing through, that movements will gives out in the form of sound. Hence the sound is produced in the larynx. That larynx is also called as sound box. Okay, sound box. Then it will pass through a tubular region. That tubular region is called as trachea. The trachea is tubular, and it is approximately 16 to 18 inches length will be there, and it is supported by cartilaginous rings. So here you can see in this figure also there is cartilaginous rings are there. So that rings will ensure that the collapsing of the trachea will not take place when the air is passing through the trachea. So it will ensure always the free flow of air will take place through this one. So never it will allow the collapsing of the trachea. Then when it reaches the chest, it will it will divide into two branches. That branches of the trachea is called as bronchus. The bronchus will enters into the lung, and the bronchus also are supported by the cartilaginous rings. Once it enters into the lungs, there it will divide into many branches. The branch of the bronchus we will call it as bronchioles. Further it will divide 2-3 times. So altogether when we are saying approximately 23 times the divisions will take place. Again further dividing like that way. Finally it will enter into, this is the respiratory tract. It will enter into a duct. That duct is called as alveolar duct, which ends in a bulbular structure, that is called as alveolus. So alveolus is the main structure which is concerned with respiratory exchange. So it is very thin, and it is highly extensive surface area and highly vascular. It is covered by moist covering, and it is also permeable to the respiratory gases. It allows the oxygen to move across from alveolar membrane to the blood, as well as from blood to the alveolar membrane. So it is permeable, and it is thin, and it is highly vascular and highly extensive surface area, moist covering. All these conditions for the requirement of respiratory organ is satisfied within the alveolus. Hence the unit of respiratory exchange we will call it as the alveolus is the unit of exchange, and hence the alveolus can be considered as the, or it is considered as the structural and functional unit of lungs. So within the alveolus only the respiratory exchange is taking place. When we move into the next region apart from that, so this is the respiratory tract. So when we say the respiratory tract, it starts from nostril, nasal cavity, pharynx, trachea, then bronchus, bronchioles, and again minute bronchioles. Finally it ends in alveolar ducts, which it leads to alveolar duct, which ends in alveolus. There the exchange of gases takes place. So approximately each lung consists of 300 million alveolus, which will come around 180 meter square surface area. Okay, so that much of surface area is presented by the alveolus, which enhance maximum respiratory exchange of gases. Now when we will move on to this one, there is one more structure, a dome-shaped structure, that is dome-shaped muscular wall, that is called as diaphragm. So the diaphragm, the role of diaphragm, the muscles on the muscular wall or the muscles on the, it is smooth muscles only. So the muscles of the contraction of the diaphragm muscles will help in inhalation as well as exhalation. So here the figure of alveolus also it is given. Then we will move on to how the respiratory process will take place. So the respiratory process, when we are saying it is breathing. Breathing is two steps, that is exhalation and inhalation. And inhalation is the taking in of oxygen, which is an active process. That means for inhalation we require energy. How this energy is utilized means it initiates with the contraction of diaphragm muscles. Okay, so when the diaphragm muscles are contracting, it is dome shape, arch shape only. When the muscles are contracting, the flattening of the diaphragm takes place. So initially it will be like this. When the muscles are contracting, flattening will take place. So when it is flattening, the chest volume will increase because lowering of the partition. And apart from that, along with that also, the ribs also surrounded by muscles. The muscles on the ribs will contract. So when these muscles are contracting, the rib cage will raise towards the front. So here also the space will increase, here also the space will increase. Net result, the whole chest cavity will increase. So the volume will increase. When the volume is increasing, automatically the pressure inside the lungs will decrease. So when the pressure is decreasing, outside the pressure is more, atmospheric air. So where there is more pressure, the oxygen rich air will enter through the nostrils to the nasal cavity, then it will fill the lungs. When the lungs are filled with more amount of oxygen rich air, the capillaries which is surrounding the alveolus will carry the more amount of carbon dioxide. So there the exchange will take place, because in the lungs more amount of oxygen, in the capillary less amount of oxygen. So oxygen rich oxygen will enter into the blood. So within the blood, the respiratory pigment, that is hemoglobin, which is present in the RBC. So the hemoglobin binds with oxygen, and this RBC will carry the oxygen to different parts of the body and each cell. When it reaches the cell, what will happen? This oxygen rich hemoglobin, within the cell the oxygen is less, because there the cellular respiration takes place. The waste product carbon dioxide is already formed within the cell. So the oxygen from the hemoglobin, from the blood, it will diffuse into the tissues. Okay, then in return from the tissues, the carbon dioxide will be carried and then it will be exchanged into the blood. So hemoglobin will deliver oxygen, in return it will take carbon dioxide. So then this blood will carry back into the lungs. There the carbon dioxide will be exchanged into this one. So here the process taking in of oxygen by the contraction of the diaphragm as well as the contraction of the rib muscles, the volume will increase and the pressure will decrease. From outside, more oxygen rich air will enter. The just opposite process only, expiration. So expiration means the contraction already has taken place, so the diaphragm relax, diaphragm muscles. So when the diaphragm muscles which are flattened already, when it is relaxing, it will go back to its dome shape. Okay, dome shape structure. So the chest volume will decrease. Simultaneously the rib muscles also will relax and they will flatten. So the whole thing, the front also it will flatten, and from this also it will be raises up. So the whole chest volume, the cavity will decrease. The volume of the lung will decrease, and when the space is decreased or the volume decreases, automatically pressure inside the lung increases. So inside more pressure, outside it is less pressure. So from where there is more pressure, the air will rush out into the body through the respiratory tract, through the nostrils, it goes out. That process is called as exhalation. But here the exhalation is passive because it is only relaxation. Mainly contraction only we require ATP. So exhalation is passive whereas inhalation is active. So with that is the process of respiration. So physical process as well as the chemical process. Physical process we will call it as breathing. Chemical process we will call it as cellular respiration. So within the cell also respiratory exchange takes place because glucose in the presence of oxygen. Glucose first it will be converted into pyruvic acid within the cytoplasm. That process is called as glycolysis, and this pyruvic acid in the presence of oxygen will be taken up from the blood to the tissue. There the glucose will be broken down first into pyruvic acid then into within the mitochondria. It will enter into the mitochondria, and within the mitochondria the pyruvic acid will be converted into carbon dioxide, water and more amount of energy. This energy is utilized for performing performing various other metabolic activities. So the entire process we collectively will call it as respiration. So this is the overall description of respiration. So with that we come to an end. Thank you for listening to my explanation. Study well.